Welcome everyone to AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday, part of AURI Connects monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. I'm Dan Scogan, the AURI Director of Government and Industry Relations, and your host on Webinar Wednesdays. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. This program aims to actively engage all participants in the food and ag industry to improve competitiveness of producers, businesses, and entrepreneurs through ongoing purposeful connection of resources and partners along the value chain, and increase knowledge of opportunities, technologies, and trends. Today's Webinar Wednesday is supported by AURI's valued partner, Predictive Search. Predictive Search combines innovative executive and professional search methods with proprietary assessment tools, predictive analytics, and digital delivery with curated video vignettes. Predictive Search measures personality, competency, cognitive ability, experience, and culture fit measures configured to your organization. Experience the state of the art and science of search with Predictive Search. Remember, this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Remember that you will be muted during our presentations, but that you can send us your questions written through the Q&A portal on your screen. The interest in renewable natural gas, or RNG, has revived activity in anaerobic digestion across the nation. The Natural Gas Innovation Act makes Minnesota a prime ground for RNG projects. Today, Erica Larson, counsel at Centerpoint Energy, will provide an overview of the related act. Our second speaker will be Dr. Pratap Pulamanapil, bioprocessing professor at Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering of the University of Florida, and will provide an introduction to anaerobic digestion. Professor Pulamanapil will be producing 2 technical seminars and follow up on this subject as well, which will be made available along with this webinar in recorded form on the AURI website as a permanently available technical resource. So with that, Erica Larson, welcome to Webinar Wednesday.
Thanks, Dan. I think we can go ahead and advance to my slides. Thank you. So like Dan started us off with, I'll be talking today about the Natural Gas Innovation Act and give you a quick overview. Centerpoint Energy was the primary champion of that act, which is why I'm going to be presenting it to you. AURI was very helpful as well and supported the act and helped us get it through. Next slide. So just a bit about Centerpoint Energy. We are a big natural gas and electric company serving a scattering of states in the middle of the country. We have a lot more gas service territory than we have electric. We're only electric in 2 states, Texas and Indiana. This gets us very focused when we're talking about our contribution to climate change. We are, I think, more focused than some large utility companies on our gas the contribution of gas to our emissions and how we are affecting the planet. I think more so than some other large utilities. Next slide. In Minnesota, we are only a gas utility. I'm primarily focused on Minnesota. We are by far the largest gas utility in the state. Our largest city is Minneapolis. Next slide. So like many large utility companies, we have our own carbon goals. We have a net zero goal by 2035 for scope 1 and 2 emissions. This is largely focused on our electric generation that we have in Indiana, closing those coal plants, shifting to more renewable energy. It does have a gas component as well, mostly about leakage from our pipeline system, but it doesn't really incorporate much in the way of renewable natural gas, hydrogen, or some of these other technologies because it's not about the actual burning of gas in the customers' homes and businesses. But we, in addition, have this 20 to 30% goal that you can see on the right-hand side, and this is really focused on that piece. So this is where renewable natural gas could play a substantial role, is using renewable natural gas to help our customers reduce their emissions by having them burn renewable natural gas rather than fossil gas. Next slide. So Natural Gas Innovation Act, in a nutshell, allows gas utilities to start working with some of these decarbonization. The act calls them innovative resources. And so you see the list of them up here. We have both supply side and demand side resources included in the Act. So on the supply side, things that the gas utility could provide instead of fossil gas, we have renewable natural gas, biogas. Renewable natural gas is going to be from primarily, we're thinking in the near term, from anaerobic digestion, although the Act also allows us to do thermal gasification or other effective conversion process. But it does have to be from an organic source to be renewable natural gas. Biogas is like renewable natural gas, except it's just not pipeline quality. So here we'd be talking about, maybe moving gas that's produced relatively near the site of use over to a specialized equipment that could burn unrefined biogas or less refined biogas than renewable natural gas. Also in the Act are power to ammonia and power to hydrogen. Both of these are defined in the Act as being green rather than blue. So we're talking about using renewable electricity or carbon-free electricity, for example, from a nuclear plant to create either hydrogen or ammonia, and then using either of those on their own as a fuel source, or in the case of hydrogen, blending them into the pipeline system, which can be done up to a certain amount. There's also discussion of creating hydrogen from renewable natural gas, creating it from biogas. That would also be permissible under the Act. Next slide. So how does the Act, this is my how does the Act work in a nutshell? How does it structured? So a gas utility may file an innovation plan with the Public Utilities Commission proposing programs using these different innovative resources that were on the previous slide. It is optional for a gas utility to file a plan. We didn't want anyone to get mad at us because they didn't want to do this, but Centerpoint certainly will be filing a plan in 2022. My understanding is that Xcel Energy, which is the second largest gas provider in the state, also plans to file an innovation plan in 2022. Once a gas utility has selected to file an innovation plan, they are locked into the structure. So it is optional at the beginning, but once they file one plan, they are required to file another plan 4 years later. So each innovation plan will run for 5 years. After 4 years, the utility will file its next plan so that it will be in place before the next 5-year period. There'll be annual status reports to the Public Utilities Commission where the PUC can order changes, can cancel programs, can add new programs. PUC has authority to do this at any time, but this would be a sort of a prompting for them to consider how an innovation plan is working. And then over on the left-hand side, I have a sort of a description of the cost cap, which is rather complicated, but for Centerpoint, it boils down to, for our first plan, we expect to be able to spend about $20 million a year in total on these innovative resources, growing to $40 million a year by the third plan. So after 10 years of the Act operating, we would hopefully jump up to that level. I do want to call your attention, because it's maybe relevant to some of you, to the bonus cap. So there's a little additional money available in the bill for certain kinds of renewable natural gas that the legislature found to be particularly environmentally friendly. And specifically, those are projects using sustainably harvested prairie grasses. So maybe blending those with manure, for example, projects that support wastewater treatment, and projects that support organics recycling programs. Next slide. So now that I've talked a little bit how it's going to work in terms of, what is the regulatory process, I want to talk a little bit about what is going to be in this plan. And the plan itself is going to be a massive document. And the regulatory process to get one of these things approved is going to be lengthy. And there's going to be a lot, especially in our first few innovation plans while the PUC is figuring out what it's doing. So an innovation plan is going to include a lot of description from the utility about the carbon intensity of resources included in the plan, forecasted greenhouse gas emissions reduction or avoidance. The heart of this whole thing is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but the legislature also added in specific additional goals they'd like to see come out of this process. So the gas utility is going to be talking about whether their plan supports agricultural goals in the state, whether it supports waste management goals, how it affects low and moderate income customers, how it affects economic development, what jobs are being created in the state, and what are the quality of those jobs. The plan will also include a lot of discussion of alternatives that the utility has for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So for every program, every innovative resource included in the plan, the gas utility is going to have to talk about other ways that they could have achieved greenhouse gas reductions of those same greenhouse gases. So for example, if the utility files a residential renewable natural gas program, they'll have to talk about why they didn't opt for a renewable electrification program or a renewable energy efficiency a residential electrification program or a residential energy efficiency program. So focus still on that residential sector and the same emissions, but other options we have for reaching those emissions. The gas utility is also going to have to file, and I think of these sort of as skeleton plans. There's going to be a preferred plan that the utility files, and then the utility is going to have to discuss, well, what would a plan look like that was only reducing half the emissions of the preferred plan? How expensive would that be? What if they filed a plan that was reducing double the emissions? How expensive would that be? The goal there is really to allow the commission to determine whether or not the utility has aimed for the right level of reduction. Next slide. Once the utility gets through this, I think at least year-long process of putting in a plan and having everyone come out and explain why that plan was bad and the utility should have done it differently, the commission will hopefully approve some plan going forward. And there's a list of things that they have to find in order to approve a plan. They have to find that the plan produces net benefits. So this is talking both about greenhouse gas emissions, but also agricultural benefits, economic benefits, all of the things that the Act identifies as being something the legislature wants to have come out of this. The plan has to promote renewable energy, avoid greenhouse gas emissions. It has to promote local economic development. Every resource included in the plan has to have a lower life cycle greenhouse gas intensity than geologic gas. There has to be tracking and verification of the renewable resources used in the plan. They have to find that the costs are reasonable. But this is a really important distinction that the Act makes, that the Commission has to find that the costs are reasonable in comparison to other things the utility could have done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously, renewable natural gas is much more expensive than fossil gas. We don't have to justify renewable natural gas as compared to fossil gas. It has to be justified as compared to electrification or energy efficiency or one of the other options that the utility has for getting at these emissions that could be tackled with renewable natural gas. Total greenhouse gas emissions have to be found to be reasonable. Considering the state's goals, the state has a goal of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050. So they have to be keeping that in mind as they approve these plans. And finally, the commission has to find that any agricultural RNG is not produced by a farm that was expanded solely or primarily to produce more RNG, to produce more poop from the cows, essentially. There were certain groups that came out in opposition to this act because they had some concerns about large farm agriculture. And so we added this provision to give them some comfort that this wouldn't be driving additional large farms. I don't think it's very realistic that it would, but it's something that might be of interest to you folks. Next slide. Our first plan is going to have certain special items that are only in it for our first one. So first, all utilities, not just Centerpoint, but every utility, their first plan has to be 50% or more for these sort of fuel type resources, RNG, hydrogen, ammonia, or biogas. I think this is really a great help to these fuel resources, to RNG and hydrogen. It gives us a real opportunity to demonstrate how they can be part of the long-term decarbonization of gas utilities. There's a lot of interest, and we're also interested in doing electrification and energy efficiency, but all of these resources I think are going to be needed. So I'm grateful that we have this real opportunity to show the value of hydrogen and RNG. Centerpoint Energy only, as the largest gas utility in the state, has agreed to, well, built into the Act, we will propose certain pilot programs in our first plan. We will propose a program for small and medium-sized businesses, which will be a sort of audit program. We have an existing program that audits and gives recommendations on energy efficiency. I'm thinking that this is going to be an expansion of that that's also going to provide recommendations for not just energy efficiency, but other ways the business could bring down their greenhouse gas emissions. There will be a program for large, hard to electrify industrial processes, so very high heat processes, and trying to help them bring down their emissions. I think hydrogen and RNG are both really good options for that. And then we're going to do a residential electrification program with a gas backup and a highly weatherized home. So we're going to really tighten up the homes. We're going to put in an electric air source heat pump, but we're going to maintain that gas backup in the home for very cold periods in the winter. And then finally, we're going to offer a district energy pilot. There's not much more definition in the act around what that has to be, but we're going to do something. Next slide. All right, and then this is the last thing I wanted to say before I'll turn it over to Dr. Pulap Manapalil. You getting an act passed probably anywhere in the country, but certainly in Minnesota, it requires a lot of stakeholders. A lot of people need to support it. And particularly with our divided legislature, we need people from all sides, from conservative and liberal backgrounds to support something. And I'm really proud of the stakeholder group we managed to build and the support we managed to get for the act. As I mentioned, AURI was a very important supporter. We had environmental groups, Center for Energy Environment, Conservation Minnesota, Fresh Energy supported the final version of the bill. We had more conservative groups like the Chamber of Commerce in support, and we had a lot of folks in between. We had unions, we had groups working for diversity in the energy sector. We had supporters of renewable natural gas, just a very wide group of people in support of the act. So that even if the act hadn't passed, honestly, I think it was very valuable just to bring all those stakeholders into one room and have them talk to each other. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Pulap Manapalil.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Dan, for the introductions. I would like to provide an overview of anaerobic digestion. As Erica mentioned, it's one of the ways in which renewable natural gas can be produced. I would also like to touch upon an anaerobic digestion project that we are currently doing in Minnesota. The project is funded by Xcel Energy, and we're collaborating with AURI and Enterprise Minnesota. Next slide. To set a definition for anaerobic digestion, it's a biochemical process. So it's converting organic compounds like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins to biogas. It's done by the action of microbes. It's a mixed culture of microbes. And the biogas that's produced is typically between 50 to 60% methane, and the rest mostly CO2 with some contaminants like hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and volatile organic compounds. I would like to highlight two key features of this process. First, the process occurs at near ambient conditions. You're talking about temperatures called body temperatures and pressures close to atmospheric pressures. Compare this with thermocatalytic processes, which run at high temperatures and pressures. And the second key feature is that the process is mediated by naturally occurring microbes. And it's a mixed culture of microbes. It's not a well-defined culture. And this has implications in the economics. It keeps the capital cost lower and also the operating cost. So you can compare this with, say, ethanol fermentation, where you use pure cultures. And in the case of cellulosic ethanol, probably you would be using genetically modified microbes. The biogas can be upgraded. So all the CO2 in the biogas can be removed to produce 100% methane. And this is what's referred to as renewable natural gas. It has a heat of combustion of about 1,000 BTUs per cubic foot. Next slide. The microbes that carry out anaerobic digestion can be found in nature. It can be found in ruminants, landfills, and sediments. But this is generally referred as biogasification, but anaerobic digestion specifically refers to those processes that occurs in engineered systems. And it's got applications in waste treatment. It's been traditionally being used for that. And more recently, there's a lot of interest in using this process for biofuel production as it produces biogas. And from biogas, one can make renewable natural gas. Next slide. It's not a one-step process in that it needs many different types of microbes to mineralize the organic compounds all the way to biogas. Whereas, say, ethanol fermentation is a one-step process. You've got one pure culture converting the sugars to ethanol. So that typically the process, can think of it as going through two steps. It's a simplification here. So the organic wastes are first acidified to organic acids like acidic, propionic, butyric, and so on. And then the methanogens convert the acidic acids along with the carbon dioxide and hydrogen to methane and carbon dioxide. So there is a lot of interest now in stopping the process with that organic acids and then using the organic acids for making bio-based products. So that would be called a mixed acid fermentation rather than anaerobic digestion because it's not going all the way to biogas. There's usually concern with odors in anaerobic digestion. Methane and CO2, which is the main products, are odorless. And the odors primarily come from sulfur compounds, which is reduced to hydrogen sulfide during the process. It can come from ammonia if there's an excess of nitrogen in the feedstock. Methylamines or amines can produce odors. And the organic acids themselves can create odors. But a well-balanced anaerobic digestion process, the organic acids do not accumulate. And so there is no buildup of organic acids like propionic and butyric acids. The amounts of these organic acids are less than, say, 100 ppm in a well-operated anaerobic digester. The gases are contained because one would be capturing the biogas for further utilization. Next slide. This picture here kind of shows the closed loop nature of anaerobic digestion. So on the left, I have the different organic waste that's typically produced through industrial processing or agricultural processing. I could also say, think of growing energy crops, specifically for the purpose of putting in an anaerobic digester. So these would then be processed through an anaerobic digester, which would produce biogas. The biogas can be used on site for power generation or for thermal applications, or it can be upgraded to renewable natural gas and then injected into the pipelines. For power, it can be taken elsewhere for power generation, for use as a vehicular fuel, or maybe as a raw material for syngas production, from which you can make other products. The digestate, which contains some of the solid residue and the effluent water, can be land applied. In this process, only the carbon is converted to biogas. The nitrogen and phosphorus are conserved. So those can be returned back to the soil as a fertilizer. But of course, there are other considerations to be taken into account for applying these or utilizing this digestate. I will talk about that in a later slide. So once you utilize the biogas or the natural gas, you're going to be releasing CO2 and hydrogen. You can think of that as being going back through photosynthesis, back to the plants, and then the whole cycle repeats itself. In terms of the net energy requirements for running the anaerobic digester, it's probably between 20% of the energy that's released in the biogas would be required to run the process. So there is a net energy generation. Next slide. This slide shows you the different utilization options. As I said, biogas can be used for thermal energy on site. So it might have to go through some minimal cleanup like desulfurization and moisture removal. It can also be used for CHP, for power and heat on site. The gas can be upgraded. So upgrading here refers to removal of CO2, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and other volatile organics to give you pure methane, almost pure methane, which is renewable natural gas. It can be compressed and used as a fuel, or it can be boosted, odorized, and pumped into the natural gas pipeline. Or you can also reform the gas, which is converting to hydrogen for use in a fuel cell, for example, for generating electricity and also heat. Next slide. So what I want to do here is to compare the energy potentials of, I'm looking at two options. One is making ethanol, and the other is making methane through anaerobic digestion. I've used a simple molecule like a sugar, could be a carbohydrate. So if you were to put the sugar through an anaerobic digester or a carbohydrate, for every pound of sugar, you would make about 0.22 pounds of methane. And the BTUs that would be generated from the methane would be about 5,000 BTUs for every pound of sugar. If the sugar were to be fermented to ethanol, the amount of ethanol that would have been produced would be about half a pound of ethanol per pound of sugar. And from an energy point of view, that's equivalent to about 5,000 BTUs of ethanol per pound of sugar. So irrespective of whether the carbohydrate is taken through for methane production or for ethanol production, the energy content of the product is about the same. Except that in the case of methane, you get a lower mass. The rest of the mass of the sugar goes off as CO2. But then in the case of ethanol, you'll also have to include the energy associated with distillation and energy associated with, say, for example, pre-treatment, if it's elastic ethanol. And then the net energy that's produced would be much lower. Whereas in the case of methane, methane is not very soluble in water. So as soon as it's produced by the microbes, it just comes off the aqueous phase into the gas phase. Not much energy is required to separate the biogas or the methane from the aqueous phase. So from a net energy perspective, there is more energy that can be obtained by making methane than ethanol. Next slide. So if one were to look at setting up an anaerobic digester, so what would need to be considered? So the first thing is how much methane can be produced from the feedstock at hand. So you determine that by doing what's called a biochemical methane potential assay, or BMP. So a BMP would tell you how much methane can be potentially produced from a certain mass of the feedstock. And if this methane potential gives you reasonably satisfactory values in terms of the setting up an anaerobic digestion project, the next consideration would be the type of digester designs that has to be chosen for processing that particular feedstock. Anaerobic digestion is a mature technology, and there are many different digestive designs out there. I'll mention a few designs in the next slide. The next thing comes to the operation of the digester. So it's necessary to maintain a proper pH, and typical pH that is favorable for the microbes, especially the methanogenic microbes, is about the neutral pH. So it's necessary to have in hand material or alkali or caustic acid to control the pH. The next operational parameter of importance is the temperature. Anaerobic digestion can be operated at different temperature regimes. We'll talk about that in a couple of slides. And then comes the nutrients. So many feedstocks may not have all the nutrients that might support the growth of the microbes. So it's necessary to ascertain what additional nutrients might be required. And then is the toxicity. Some feedstocks can contain toxins to the microbes, which can suppress anaerobic digestion. So that needs to be considered as well. And then what to do with the digestate. So not all the feedstock is going to be converted to biogas. There's going to be a lot of solid residue and wastewater that has to be managed appropriately. So there is the treatment and utilization considerations that has to be accounted for the digestate. Next slide. So this gives you lists a few designs of anaerobic digesters. And as I mentioned, anaerobic digestion is a mature technology. The digester design can be simple stirred tank reactor, which is simply a vessel with agitation inside. It could be an anaerobic filter, which contains packing material, and the waste trickles over this packed bed. There are more sophisticated designs like the upflow anaerobic sludge blanket reactor, a fluidized bed reactor. And then when it comes to, say, solid waste, there are many designs like a plug flow system. Then there are two-stage digesters where the acidogenic phase is separated from the methanogenic phase. And so, for example, the solid substrate would be first acidified, and then the acidified liquid would be then taken through a methanogenic state for making the biogas. There are designs out there which look into that. And typically the type of design that you'd use will depend upon the characteristics of feedstock, especially the solids content of the feedstock. So if it is low solids, like say, for example, many industrial wastewaters or municipal sewage, you could use anaerobic filter or an upflow anaerobic sludge blanket reactor. If there is some particulate matter, you might be limited in type of the designs that could be used. So typically a stirred tank reactor would be employed. And for high solids, what I have in mind is the municipal solid waste or agricultural residues and energy crops. You could use a stirred tank reactor by making a slurry of this solid feedstock, or you could use plug flow reactors and or two-stage reactors. Next slide. Temperature, it could run, digesters could be operated at very low temperatures, which we call cyclophilic temperatures, or at mesophilic temperatures, which is kind of close to our body temperature, like about between, say, 38 degrees Celsius or so. And then the higher temperatures, which is running at about 55 degrees Celsius. So each has its own benefits. So with mesophilic and thermophilic operation, because they're running at a higher temperature, you might need to provide some kind of a heating. Of course, thermophilic temperature will require more energy input for maintaining the high temperatures. Benefit of thermophilic temperatures is that you get much faster rates of breakdown of the organic material, which corresponds to increased rates of biogas production. And also due to the high temperatures, if pathogens, whether human pathogens or animal pathogens or plant pathogens, you achieve a much higher pathogen inactivation with the thermophilic operation than the mesophilic operation. A benefit of mesophilic operation is that you have a much more diverse group of microbes that operate at these temperatures. So it might be possible to break down many different types of molecules due to this diversity in the microbes at this mesophilic temperatures. Next slide. And as I mentioned, pH, keep it between close to neutral conditions. And if the two phases are going to be separated, the acidogenic phase from the methanogenic phase, The acidogenic phase will run well even at very low pH, around about 5. But the methanogenic phase has to be operated at neutral pH conditions. It's also important to maintain appropriate carbon to nitrogen ratio in the feedstock for proper anaerobic digestion. Typically, microbial cells are at about 50% carbon on a dry basis and maybe about 14% nitrogen. So one needs to supply enough nitrogen to support the growth of the microbes. And typically a ratio of 20 to 1 or between 20 to 1 and 30 to 1 is considered a good ratio. And also one needs to provide other macro and micronutrients like phosphorus, micronutrients like metals. So it needs to be ensured that such nutrients are available in the feedstock, or it has to be supplied separately into the digester. Next slide. Some feedstocks, depending upon the source, might contain high salt. So that can be inhibitory to the process. Heavy metals can be inhibitory. High levels of sulfide can cause inhibition. And the presence of, say, bactericides and so on can also suppress methanogenic activity. So it's necessary to ascertain whether there is any toxic components in the feedstock that could adversely affect the process. Having said that, many of these inhibitory compounds, I mean, the digester inoculum can be acclimatized to tolerate these toxins to high levels. So for example, in our laboratory, we have been able to conduct anaerobic digestion at seawater salinity. So it's possible to acclimatize the microbes to tolerate many of these toxins. Eventually, some of the toxins would be degraded. Next slide. And it's also necessary to monitor the digestion process once the digester is set up. So the biogas flow rate is typically monitored, the composition, the pH, volatile fatty acids, and alkalinity. The last three, the pH, volatile fatty acids, and alkalinity, can be monitored through a simple titration technique. Next slide. So these are some of the feedstocks that we have digested in our laboratory. And you can see it varies between energy crops like water hyacinth, sorghum, napier grass, algae, seaweed, to waste feedstocks. So all these feedstocks are digested very well, and they show good methane potential. I have 3 of them shown in the blue font. So that's something that we looked at in an Excel project that we did about 10 years ago with American Crystal Sugar Company, where we built a 3 tons per day pilot plant to process their waste pulp, the tailings, and the raffinate. And we also worked with Hennepin County on anaerobically digesting municipal solid waste, so source separated municipal solid waste. Next slide. So I briefly want to touch upon our current project in Minnesota. So this is funded by Xcel Energy. And we're looking at biochemical methane potential, so many organic waste generated around the state. And the list there is the different waste streams that we have tested for the methane potential. And we worked with Enterprise Minnesota, with Bill Martinson, to identify these waste streams, the candidate waste streams. And we did the laboratory analysis of these waste streams to look at the methane potential. And as the next part of the project, we also constructed a mobile self-contained pilot anaerobic digester system. So this could be used for testing various feedstocks in the state of Minnesota. Currently, the system is located at AURI site in Waseca. And we have processed many different wastewaters through this mobile unit. I have some pictures of this unit in the subsequent slides. Next slide. So just a description. So this pilot unit contains a feed bin with a grinder pump. So you can look at digesting solid feedstocks as well. We have 2,200 gallon digesters housed in this trailer. It has transfer pumps for recirculation, feeding, digestate removal, and so on. It's got a biogas metering device, a gas analyzer for gas composition measurement. This part of the trailer is separated into a laboratory space where we can do dry weight, volatile solids, pH, VFA, and alkalinity analysis. And it's incorporated with many sensors and alarms for safety. Training videos and handouts describing this component will be uploaded into the AURI website in the next month or so. Next slide. So these are some pictures of this trailer mounted unit. So what I show here is a trailer. The top left is the laboratory part of that trailer. And what you see on the right side is inside of the trailer before we install the digesters and other equipment. Next slide. So this is where it is now. It's at Waseca, and it requires 230 volt and a 120 volt power supply and water. What you see on the middle picture is from the back view. So that's a feed bin into which you can load the feed. And next slide. And that's the left side is the pump, the grinder pump inside the feed bin, which can grind the feedstock if it contains solid material, or it can pump the feedstock into the digester. So what you see there on the right side picture is the two digesters, one behind the other. So you can run the system as a two-stage digestion system, because one of them can be used as an acidogenic reactor and the other can be methanogenic. In fact, the reactor at the far end is an anaerobic filter. It contains packing material in it. Or you can use a second reactor as a storage of inoculum. So if something goes wrong, you can add the inoculum from the second reactor to the first reactor to get the whole process going again quickly. And in the center of that the picture there is a transfer pump, which can move liquid from the first to the second reactor, or recirculate liquid, or add feed, or take digestate. So it serves many purposes. So as I said, we will post a video of the system, as well as the operation of the digester and the lab analysis that we can do there. So these will be posted on the AURI website soon. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Should hopefully lead to some interesting questions. We have a lot of people on today that are involved in this in one way or another. I kept thinking, every time I came up with a question, Dr. Patrap, you seem to answer it with your next slide. So very informative. I'm going to maybe go back to you just a little bit, because you gave us that list of conditions, and it seemed to raise a lot of questions. So do you have a source that people can go and get answers to that list of conditions that need to be addressed through anaerobic digestion? Is there a one-stop shop for them to get more information?
That's something that's available in literature, and the different operating conditions for the anaerobic digestion process. There are many review papers which highlight those conditions. At the moment, I can't probably post links to those at the AURI website when these handouts would be posted.
And we mentioned in our opening comments that you would be providing a couple of other videos that would be linked to AURI's website. What are we going to learn in those videos?
Those videos would highlight the components of the mobile digester. So we'll explain each of the part equipment there. We will highlight the operation of the mobile digester. And, excuse me. We will also then show that the different laboratory analysis that can be performed, say for finding volatile fatty acid concentrations in the sample, the alkalinity, the dry weight, as well as the volatile solids content. So this is what we propose to add videos of on the AURI website.
One of the, Erica, I wanted to ask you, I understand that Centerpoint is going to be filing their paperwork to get involved in the act, the Renewable Natural Gas Innovation Act. With your ear to the ground in Minnesota, are there others that you're aware of that are getting ready to file those papers as well? Is it something that people have shown a lot of interest in?
Yeah, I think Excel will. I think they've said they will. Also, I think in 2022, they might beat us. We'll see which one of us gets in there first. It's a lot of work to put one of these together. I don't know about any of the other gas utilities. Minnesota Energy Resources Corporation has said that they are interested, but I don't know how quickly they'd move on it. If Excel and Centerpoint go, that's probably 2/3 to 3/4 of all the gas in the state. If we got Merck in there, I think we'd be talking 90%.
Is it designed for the big producers? Is it going to be difficult for small producers to get online?
Well, it depends on how the utility structures their program. So, I think that we're very interested in bringing small producers on. And I think that some of the benefits the legislature is looking for can be well served by those smaller producers. So in addition to looking for greenhouse gas emissions reduction, the act is looking for agricultural benefits, other environmental benefits, and some of those things may be served very well by small producers. On the other hand, the large producers are going to have the economies of scale where they can just be cheaper for the utilities. So, the commission is currently working through a process to figure out how they're going to measure cost effectiveness for utility proposals. And Centerpoint is really lobbying strongly for making sure that those non-greenhouse gas benefits are accurately accounted for and really weighing in. And I'm hoping that that would help shift things so that the small producers really have a chance to look like they are cost effective.
And I don't know who wants to take this one on, but we have a question here. Do you think it could be used to capture gas from home septic systems to offset heating fuel costs?
That's an interesting one. I think probably it could, because I would say that that's biogas, right? So biogas is one of the eligible resources in the bill. So if a utility put together a program to do that and they used that biogas for home heating instead of using gas, I think that would qualify. I don't know exactly how you would structure that program, but I think it could be done.
Dr. Pratap, early on, anaerobic digesters were just difficult to maintain and to operate properly, and a lot of them that were set up on farm sites, the farmer wanted to farm and not so much run an anaerobic digester. Has technology made them more user-friendly now?
There are newer designs of digesters. A couple of farms around Gainesville here, they have this below ground large bulk flow anaerobic digestion system where it takes a lot of land area, but operation wise, it does not need much attention. And so those have been operating very well. So I think this design is out of Wisconsin. I don't know the manufacturer, but yes, that's becoming very popular, these large below ground systems for digesting manure.
The other thing
But once again, having said that, yes, there are issues with the amount of gas that's produced, because manure by itself does not make many gas. If you think of it, manure is something that's already been through the animals, so all the good nutrients have been removed. So if mixed with other feedstocks, it will be a good feedstock to digest. Yes. Yeah.
I guess that was maybe where I was going eventually with my questioning. If you set these up at a farm, or if you set them up at a food processing site or a city septic system, are you seeing that you can add other feedstocks to these digesters and they remain efficient?
Yes. So we've looked at a couple of instances where they were adding food waste to manure, and the digester design to start with is over-designed, so it's able to handle more feed. So usually mixing food waste, say, with animal manure does not seem to affect adversely the existing design. So the existing design can handle additional load. Yes.
Here we have a question from one of our participants today. What kind of outreach has been done to the hog industry or farmers for upscaling this technology, either from AURI or from Centerpoint Energy? And what has the response on the ground been? Are there already large-scale projects underway in the state, or is it still a waiting game until all of the paperwork has been filed?
I think the primary driver for producing renewable natural gas right now is not Centerpoint Energy's program. Gas utilities are starting to get in this game a little bit. We are getting in this game. There's some utilities on the East Coast and the West Coast that are starting to look into buying and starting to buy RNG in relatively small quantities. But I mean, I think most folks on the call know that the primary driver for RNG right now is the low carbon fuel standard in California and the federal renewable fuel standard. So, we've done some outreach around the bill to the hog industry, and we did not get a huge amount of interest. I think they've, feel like they've been burned by some projects in the past, maybe early on in anaerobic digestion. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not super able to explain to them, oh, digester technology is better now, and you can do much better. That's not going to be me. We got a little more interest from the dairies. There is a large dairy project that is now operating in Minnesota. I assume selling their gas into the California system. There's a landfill that is working on coming online, another dairy project that's coming online, and we'll probably have one or two interconnected to our system, either food processing or dairies in the next year or two. But yeah, I welcome advice on how to get the hog industry more interested in this, because I know that they are further south.
Is it a potential another revenue stream for farmers?
Oh yeah, yeah. We will pay for this gas, and we will pay market prices. So we'll be competing with the low carbon fuel standard, the renewable fuel standard. We might be able to get a little better deal because we'll probably sign a longer term contract. I think farmers are a little bit subject to the ups and downs of the LCFS market right now, and that has been maybe a depressor on certain projects. We'll probably be looking for 5-10-year deals, but we'll pay prices that make that competitive with LCFS.
Dr. Pratap, and maybe it's too early, any surprises coming out of the pilot project down in Waseca yet? Are you learning anything that you maybe didn't expect to learn?
Well, not yet. Everything has been going well so far. One of the wastewater that we worked with later realized that had a lot of high salt content. But I mean, we were not facing any trouble with it, even though the salinity is quite high. It's digesting very well in the system. So yeah.
I see Rod has a comment on the question of scalability and the economics of scaling. And Rod, you may have to put that in the chat for others to see, or you can try to send it to me in the Q&A portal in the form of a question, and we'll have our panelists maybe react to it. But is the economy of scale a real issue here as people maybe think about coming online with a digester of some kind?
Dan,
Hi, Rod.
Hello. The scale issue is really one of about feedstock, and in many cases, historically, because of the cost of the capital equipment, only large farms, large dairies, large operations can participate. There's a new approach to this currently afoot, which is consolidation of feedstocks. So instead of one farm producing the organics to digest, multiple farms are brought together to participate. And the other is the move to start doing mixed feedstock operations. So you can combine animal waste, human waste, organics from different ag processing operations into a specific operation. So the anaerobic digestion really does lend itself to smaller operations and smaller businesses. It's just that you have to do more of a cooperative approach as opposed to a standalone approach.
Either of our panelists want to react to that comment? If not, I think I'll come back to Dr. Pratap and then to Erica and just give you the final word here today. Dr. Pratap, what should we be looking for? What should we be thinking about in the world of anaerobic digestion as we move forward?
I think one of the key considerations should be the operation of the digester. And as you said, in a farm unit, the farmer is not interested in running the digester. And usually I seen that that leads to problems with the operational, and so many digesters are not functioning properly because of that. So probably there's a need to kind of come up with mechanisms by which you can have, let's say, distributed operation of the anaerobic digester system. That means one particular entity can look at the operational part, and they can look at different digesters, operating different digesters in a particular locality. And that way take that the business of running the digester out of the farmer's hand, but have it done separately. So that could be a way of promoting the uptake of anaerobic digestion technology, I think.
And Erica, as we move forward with Renewable Natural Gas Innovation Act and its impact on the state of Minnesota, what do you want to leave our participants with today?
I guess I'll sort of talk a little bit to the what do I want renewable natural gas folks to know about sort of how we're going to move forward with bringing RNG more into the gas utility space instead of just the transportation space. And I think there's two main sort of criticisms that we're fighting when we bring renewable natural gas online. So the first being this general concern about agriculture and whether we should be supporting these large farms, whether they're really, maybe they have GHG benefits, but the other environmental detriment of these farms is so massive, we don't want to subsidize them at all. So we could definitely in the gas industry use agriculture's help in responding to messages like that, since we don't know your business. So appreciate any help you can lend on that side would be great. And then the other thing that we are fighting a bit is the scalability of this resource to face the challenge of how much gas we use in the country. I don't think it's a reasonable expectation to say that renewable natural gas is going to displace 100% of the gas we use, and that we can just keep growing how much gas we use without concern because we have this renewable resource. But I think there is a thought that, well, then why should we even bother with this? If it's such a small piece of the pie. So I think showing that this is a very important piece and bigger maybe than people think could be really helpful in helping us get permission from our commissions and our stakeholders to move forward with these projects.
Very good. That concludes AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday for today, and we do want to thank our presenters. AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday is presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. We are interested in your feedback, so please respond when we send you our event evaluations. Remember, for more information on today's program or any of the work that AURI is involved in, you can go to auri.org. And then please join us for the next Webinar Wednesday coming up on December 8th. Broadening Horizons, Minnesota's Agriculture, Food, and Ecosystem, Themes from a 2021 Assessment. This webinar will be focusing on some themes derived from the industry assessment of over 69 food, agriculture, and ecosystem partners across Minnesota, including a view of the economic, social, and ecosystem challenges and opportunities. Industry speakers will be illuminating gaps and successes in navigating market and supply chain challenges and provide a forward-looking perspective for the agriculture and food industry. You can always learn more about other work that AURI is involved with by going online at auri.org. And we're looking forward to having you join us again on December 8th for another AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday.